Okay, so basically for today's video, I'm just going to talk you through the process of how the writing paper is marked, what the mark scheme looks like, and how that would be applied. And I'm going to do that by basically working through an example answer that City and Guilds send out to us as tutors, as examples of this is a good pass, this is a borderline pass, this is a fail. And the one I'm going to look at today is a borderline pass. So this is a student who basically scraped through on the skin of their teeth. So before we look at the text itself, let's have a quick look at the mark scheme. And there's a few things I'd really like to draw your attention to here. First off, when we talk about writing composition, we're basically talking about everything that isn't spelling, punctuation, and grammar here. Now, what we're asked to do as what examiners are asked to do rather, is they're asked to basically make a holistic judgment. What that means is they look at the whole text. This is a little different from how it used to be, where marks are awarded almost independently from each other. Now, the entire paper is sort of looked at, the entire task is looked at, and an overall mark is assigned. So, the way it works really is that you're given 4 bands. Each has its own sort of like mark level, and you just work out from the descriptors exactly where that student's response belongs. And as we can see here, basically, to get top marks in the band, you have to have all those bullet points within that band. Okay. Now, this thing here I'd like to draw your attention to: bands 3 and 4 consistently or mostly. So those are the top bands. They can only be awarded for the text as appropriate length. As approximately as specified by the question, or longer. Now that word approximately that there, basically what that means is while you absolutely should not be counting words in the exam, you should aim to get it somewhere within the word count they specify. Okay, and the best way to do that is to have some idea of how many words you write per page of A4. Another quick way to work it out in the spur of the moment really is to find an average line of text that you've written, count the amount of words on that line, and then multiply it by the number of lines you have written. And that should give you a rough approximation. They are not going to be necessarily counting every single word, but they do expect it to be somewhere within that figure that they specify. So let's have a quick look at the mark scheme here. So this is for your content, really. So this is all the stuff that isn't spelling, punctuation, and grammar. And you've got 6 bullet points here. Okay, and the way this works here is the first bullet point is about getting across information, ideas, and opinions clearly, coherently, and effectively. The next one is writing the appropriate level of detail to suit purpose and audience. And what this means isn't necessarily that the text is long enough, it's that you've gone into detail about the right things. Okay? Organising writing for different purposes, so this is to do with format and structure and paragraphing, so what they'd expect to see in an article, for instance. Conveying clear meaning, so are you writing clearly? And also, does your writing flow? Is there a logical sequence to this? If you're writing a letter of complaint, does it start with an instruction as to why you're writing, for instance? Uses different language and register suited to purpose and audience, so, is your tone formal if you're writing to someone formally? Register also deals with style, so if you're trying to persuade someone, you might use quite a sort of chatty and upbeat style. For instance, if you're complaining, it's going to be quite serious, regardless of how formal or informal that is going to be. And consistently accurately constructs complex sentences. And the way that the spelling, punctuation, and grammar is marked here is again bands 0 through to 4, consistently accurate, including ambitious and or irregular words where used. So yeah, feel free to pause this and have a quick look through. A couple of things to draw your attention to here is where it says consistently accurate, they do not expect something to be 100% accurate. They appreciate you've got about 40 minutes to get this thing done in. Ambitious and or irregular words where used, so it's always a good idea to have a go. If you've got a choice between writing using a word that you don't quite know how to spell but is much better and a bit more ambitious, use that, because you'll pick up marks for that in other areas. Punctuation, so they're expecting here to see colons, commas, inverted commas, apostrophes, quotation marks, which is known as sort of advanced punctuation here, really. They wouldn't expect to see all of those, but they'd expect to see some of them, and they'd expect to see them used accurately. And grammar, again, consistently accurate. And it says here, length, focus, and structure of sentences are varied to add clarity and emphasis. So basically, you might be using short sentences for, sort of dramatic effect, or longer, more complex sentences to describe, and you would make the right decision for those. Tenses and verb forms are controlled. So basically, are your tenses correct? So let's have a look then, with all that in mind, at the example piece of work. And again, do bear in mind, this is a sort of level 2 piece of writing, and this is a borderline part. So this is someone who's scraped through by the skin of their teeth. So the first thing that the examiner's probably going to do is have a bit of a look again up the top here at this, at your sort of content communication bit. And they're probably also going to have a bit of a think here about indicative content. So not every, you may come up with ideas that are a bit different from this, but this is broadly what they'd expect to see here. So experiences of work placement, encouraging people to seek work placements in an area of interest of them, and how work placements will benefit their career development. So with that in mind, let's have a look here at the first couple of bullet points. So remember, that's communicating information, ideas and opinions clearly and effectively, and going into the right level of detail when required. So do feel free to pause the video here and have a go at this yourself. To my mind, in terms of ideas and opinions being communicated clearly and effectively, reading through this, I mean, yeah, they've got across that key idea that work placements are important and that people should do them. And they've also sort of communicated this idea that you should find your own work placement when you know it will be useful and what you want to be doing here. Now, in terms of clearly and coherently, I mean, this first paragraph here, they've made a reasonably clear point, but there are parts here that don't quite hang together. They're not being quite as clear as they could be. Like, for instance, this bit here, relied on someone else finding work placement for me, and what I should have done is found it out myself. I've always worked in the fashion industry, but my placement was a company that sell water filters, because it's not for me. I mean, there are some ideas coming across here, but I can't honestly say this is clear. However, for the most part, I would say that yes, this person is communicating these ideas and opinions and ideas fairly clearly, coherently and effectively throughout most of this text. Not all of it by any stretch of the imagination, but for most of it, I would say. Now, moving on here to appropriate detail and length. Not quite, no. Some of the time I'd say, yeah, I'd say that this first paragraph it might not be clear enough, but it certainly goes into a decent amount of detail. But this second point here, this is the bit where they should really be explaining what they liked about the second placement. And literally all they put here is help me do all sorts of things that I enjoy. There's no necessary link here either to this idea of it helping out the career, helping out sort of like what you're going to be doing. Now the second part of the mark scheme deals with appropriate format and structure and paragraphing, as well as things like conveying clear meaning and establishing cohesion. That's bullet points number 3 and 4 respectively. So I mean, if we have a quick look at those, the layout's fine. I've got no issues with that layout at all, They're using subheadings quite nicely to divide up these different things, which I think is a good call here. There's a nice little introduction here. If I was being really picky, I might say I'd expect a conclusion, but certainly I would say that this student is fairly consistently, so they get into band 4 for that if you recall, laying this text out properly, the structure's nice, and they're using paragraphs correctly. Now, in terms of clear meaning and cohesion, again, some of the time this hangs together. In fact, I'd go as far as to say most of the time this hangs together. You've got your nice little introduction here, and then it sort of leads on here. They're using my first one, my second placement, nice little discourse markers here. But it does fall apart a bit towards the end, I would say. It's not quite as clear as it could be, so I'll put this in a band 3 or most of the time. Now, moving on to language and register. So remember, that is your tone and the way you write, and whether it's appropriate for audience and purpose. Now, bear in mind, you're writing a blog here, so I wouldn't necessarily expect to see it being ultra formal. I'd expect it to be sort of very much based on the student's experience, and they've broadly done that. There are parts here where it doesn't really entirely sit right with me, though. And again, I think part of the problem here is that it's quite a short response. You know, it's not quite as long as it could be, or should be rather. It is definitely adapted. They've thought about their purpose and they've thought about their audience. But again, the bit here where they're not really telling me what goes on in their second placement certainly knocks on there, really. And I think they could have done more with that and sort of engaged the reader a little bit more. You know. I like the bit at the end where it says find your own placement when you know it will be useful and what you will do. So yeah, I'll put that in a band 3 probably. And in terms of complex sentences, there certainly are complex sentences in here. However, they're not being used accurately all the time, which sort of basically knocks them down, I'd say, to a band 3. And overall, for their content, remember we haven't really looked at spelling, punctuation, and grammar much yet. Well, at all really. I would probably give them 10, which is, it's a band 3. And if you recall here, looking at the mark scheme, your band 3 marks are between 8 and 11. And I would say they've probably got more band 3s here than anything else. They've got a bit in band 2 there. So yeah, I would say 10. They're not at the top of the mark scheme by any stretch of imagination, because don't forget, to award 11 marks, the examiner needs to see you ticking all those bullet points in band 3, all of them. And they have got one in band 2, which does sort of trip them up a bit. So I'd say a 10. So moving on to spelling, punctuation and grammar. Now you see here straight away, because Word kindly highlights for us in red spelling errors, you've got a reasonable amount of spelling errors, and to be honest, it's not so much. It's also not just their spelling errors that really sort of hurt them here. They're not exactly going out on a limb with some of their wording here, really. You've also got words, things like future, I'd expect to see spelt correctly at level 2, same as relied, and I certainly wouldn't expect to see a student forgetting to use a capital I for I at level 2. So some of the time I put the spelling, and again, if we look at punctuation, yeah, that would sort of trip up their punctuation a little bit there, really. And also, I can't really see anything. I can see an apostrophe there, but it's an apostrophe of omission, not a possessive apostrophe. So they're simply not really demonstrating they can use more advanced punctuation here, and that is going to trip them up. So again, I'll put them in the band 2 there. As for their grammar, we've got a couple of errors here, but nothing too serious. I'd say most of the time that's fairly accurate. So that's how, broadly speaking, we'd work it out. We'd look at the whole text, we'd sort of go through our mark scheme, we'd have a quick look, sort of like a quick read to start with, just to get an overall idea of where the text is going, and then we'd go through bit by bit and just see what band students fall into for those things in terms of content and communication, and then we'd go through a fine-tooth comb for spelling, punctuation and grammar, and we'd finally arrive at a mark. And if you're interested, this learner actually got 17.